Notice of motion for the adoption of the report of the Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women Advancement and Youth Development.
Notice of motion for the adoption of the report of the Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women Advancement and Youth Development. Honorable Monica Mutswangwa, can you move the motion?
Thank you, Mr. President. I beg to move that this House adopts the report of the Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women's Advancement and Youth Development for the 37th Plenary Assembly Session.
Any seconder? Seconder Botswana. Let me try to pronounce your name. Can you show me again? Honorable Tsileletso has seconded. I shall now allow the mover to present the report. Honorable Mutswangwa.
Once again, thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women's Advancement and Youth Development, guided by its mandate in terms of Rule 41A of the Rules of Procedure, convened its two-day meeting on Wednesday 27th and Thursday 28th May 2015 at Pakalane Golf Estate in Gaborone, Botswana. Present at this meeting were the members from the following national parliaments: Angola, there was Honorable Faustina Alves; Botswana, Honorable Tsireletso, and she was attending for the first time; Malawi, Honorable Patricia Kainga; Namibia, Honorable Ida Hoffman; South Africa, Honorable Rosalia Mrotowa; Swaziland, Honorable Sikumbuzo Glovu; Tanzania, Honorable Anna Abdallah; Zambia, Honorable Moses Chishimba; and Zimbabwe, Honorable Monica Mutswangwa, who is talking right now, who is the chairperson of that standing committee. At this stage, I would like to thank the members for what went through that workshop. We received apologies from the National Parliament of Mozambique, Honorable Francisco Domingos Thomas. Mr. President, the first day of the meeting focused on the gender responsive budgeting awareness raising workshop, whose specific outcomes were to ensure that honorable members are aware of gender related concepts and of what gender responsive budgeting is all about, its relevance to the roles and functions as parliamentarians throughout our mandates of lawmaking, oversight, representation. Also to ensure that members have basic awareness of gender responsive budgeting, how it fits into the overall budget cycle, and what are the strategies to influence it. The other outcome was also to make sure that members are able to identify and raise gender-specific issues when budgets are presented in Parliament. The following topics were covered. That's gender budgeting, how it can improve and transform budgeting while promoting human rights for all. Implications of the budget for men and women, as well as the difference between the groups. Also, it covered monitoring budgets through benchmarks of the UN Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is CEDAW. Monitoring budgets through the benchmarks of the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development, covering gender mainstreaming. Summary of inputs and discussion. These are some of the factors which were found to be gender-blind budgets, which promotes gender-blind budgets. There is inadequate attention to gender analysis tends to ignore women's contributions, their well-being, and their concerns. There is also a failure to classify all human activities through time and to address the issues of women's unpaid labor. The imbalanced power relations between men and women. This also promotes women's deprivations, subordinations, and marginalization. Failure also to acknowledge the different conditions and positions of men and women, boys and girls in society. Also portraying budgets and finances as a rocket science, instead of looking at it as an everyday issue that all can contribute to. Most participants agreed that the gender-responsive budgeting workshop should not be a once-off, one-day event, as participants have just started to see the gross mismatches in their handling of gender and budget issues. Mr. President, the committee resolved to embark on a project to build capacity in support of gender-responsive budgeting within the following bodies: all SADC-PF standing committees, including the RWPC, the Executive Committee and its subcommittees, as well as the standing committees of national parliaments on gender and on women's affairs, the National Parliament's Women's Caucuses, National Parliament's budgeting committees, and officials responsible for all budgeting processes. At this meeting, the Standing Committee adopted a pledge made by Dr. Jeff Bouch, Director of the Association of European Parliaments with Africa, AWEPA, in light of progress made by the Standing Committee towards carving its strategic role in the SADC Parliamentary Forum. Dr. Bouch pledged financial and technical support for the purpose of monitoring and mainstreaming of issues of gender in SADC parliaments in general and in SADC-PF standing committees and programs in particular. Mr. President, the second day focused on the committee's business. Having considered and confirmed the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on 26th October 2014 in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, the committee deliberated on matters arising from those minutes, noting 3 points in particular. The first point that the committee dealt with was the failure to implement one of the resolutions taken at the 2014-36 Plenary Assembly session, namely amending SADC-PF Constitution Clause 12.2 to include the chairperson or vice chairperson of the Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women's Advancement, and Youth Development with full voting powers. The 36th Plenary Assembly, Mr. President, resolved that Clause 12.2a should be amended to include the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women's Advancement, and Youth Development as an exception. The mandate of our committee being that of gender mainstreaming as a strategy of gender equality across all other standing committees. Expressing concern that this resolution had not yet been implemented, the Standing Committee calls upon the SADC Parliamentary Forum Executive Committee as the management body of the Parliamentary Forum to see to it that the resolution is implemented with immediate effect. Mr. President, in terms of progress made on the development of a gender equality women's advancement policy, the committee noted that phase 1 of the initiative, namely a gender audit of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, was only partially completed. In order to proceed further with phase 2, it noted that the report on the findings and recommendations of the audit needed to be validated by the Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women's Advancement, and Youth Development, and also by the Secretariat. The second point dealt with funding challenges that had delayed the completion of phase 2. the development of a policy on gender equality and women advancement. In this regard, the committee adopted a pledge by the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, International IDEA, to fund the two outstanding activities of the project, namely holding validation workshops and writing up the policy. The third point dealt with progress made towards carving a niche for the SADC legislative sector in the processing planning for the period beyond 2015. In this regard, the Standing Committee resolved to do as follows. As an interparliamentary body whose members are charged with lawmaking, oversight, and representation, the committee undertook to lead a process of ensuring that the legislative sector has a clearly articulated and specific role in the institutional arrangement of the protocol, that is Article 34. Mr. President, to facilitate the above, the committee also undertook to establish a forum of all chairpersons of the national parliament's standing or portfolio committees on gender or women's affairs. This forum will oversee the implementation of the SADC protocol by SADC gender ministers and report to the SADC Parliamentary Forum Plenary Assembly through the Committee on Gender Equality, Women's Advancement and Youth Development. The chairpersons will then report back to national parliaments. The chairpersons forum, which will include the chairperson of GAYWIDE, which is the Gender Equality, Women's Advancement and Youth Development, undertook to meet prior to each gender ministers forum in order to contribute to the latter's report to the Summit of the Heads of State, which will be in August. The Standing Committee undertook to conduct a two-day dialogue with the chairpersons of Gender and Women's Affairs portfolio committees of the 14 national parliaments before the review of the SADC protocol on gender and development is finalized. This is to debate, solicit their buy-in, and finalize the above. Given that the committee does not itself have the funds, it resolved to solicit funding from national parliaments to cover the logistical cost of attendance at the two-day dialogue by the respective chairpersons of Women Affairs and Gender Committees. Regarding progress made towards researching best practices on the location of youth development across SADC national parliaments and other similar-minded institutions, the committee resolved that youth development should remain with the Committee on Gender Equality and Women's Advancement. To avert possible misunderstanding, it was resolved that there should be harmonization between the Gender Equality, Women's Advancement and Youth Development so that we focus on areas of human development and special programs. This will have the effect of officially making youth-related issues part of the committee's core business. Mr. President, in line with Rule 4.1c and Clause 2, Honorable Shireletso from the National Parliament of the Republic of Botswana was unanimously adopted as the Vice President of the Gender Equality, Women's Advancement and Youth Development Standing Committee, replacing her predecessor. The committee members wished her well in her new role. Mr. President, in line with its mandate, once again, GAYWIDE, which actually states that we oversee gender mainstreaming across SADC national parliaments in general and SADC-PF in particular, the committee resolved to identify additional areas of priority for the collaboration between SADC-PF Gender Equality, Women's Advancement and Youth Development, and AWEPA over and above the gender-responsive budgeting capacity building, which include providing institutional and technical support to the SADC Forum of National Parliaments, chairpersons of women affairs or gender standing or portfolio committees. Also to support initiatives aimed at strengthening the capacity of both the gender equality, women's advancement and youth development, and the standing committees on gender and women's affairs. We need also to support initiatives that seek to strengthen other SADC-PF standing committee capacity when it comes to mainstreaming gender. The Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women's Advancement and Youth Development therefore submits these resolutions to the Plenary Assembly for adoption. Mr. President, I beg to move the report of our committee.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Let's have the seconder. Can you second in the debate of the motion?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on behalf of the Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women's Advancement and Youth Development, I second the motions moved by the Standing Committee's Chairperson, Honorable Mushabangwa. Mr. President, at times women seem to be resisting an idea or a concept not due to negativity, but due to limited knowledge. It is against this backdrop that the committee resolved to have +2 hours with each of the SADC-PF standing committees and organs, including the Regional Women's Parliamentary Caucuses, Executive Committee, and its subcommittees, to demystify any uncertainties about the standing committee's roles and responsibilities and approach to its works with the aim of soliciting collaboration with all SADC-PF stakeholders. We are looking at negotiating that slot during the 38th Plenary Assembly. Mr. President, convinced that the integration and mainstreaming of gender issues into the SADC program of action and community building initiative is key to the sustainable development of the SADC region. One of the clauses of SADC Gender and Development Declaration, signed by heads of states and government on the 17th of August 2008. Monitoring gender mainstreaming in SADC national parliaments in general and SADC-PF policies and practices in particular. One of the resolutions of the SADC-PF 31st Plenary Assembly session of the 26th June 2014 in Port Louis, Mauritius, was adoption of gender equality, women's advancement, and youth development and development mandate, including this one on gender mainstreaming. Mr. President, the above codes are shared to remind this meeting where the committee's mandate comes from, and also to highlight the gender mainstreaming can never be this committee's sole responsibility. You empower and then you oversee. Hence, the committee resolved to welcome our past pledge to provide technical and financial support to all SADC-PF stakeholders, including national parliaments, regarding gender mainstreaming initiatives. The business of SADC protocol on gender and development can never be complete without legislators' active involvement. Hence, the committee resolved to have a forum of chairpersons of women's affairs and gender standing committees to oversee implementation of gender protocol by the executive at the regional. It will interface with the Gender Ministries Forum. Mr. President, it cannot be business as usual. The expiry date of gender inequalities 2030 is just around the corner. We cannot afford to be found napping again. Gender equality is a must. I want to echo the chairperson's plea to national parliaments. They must really consider covering all costs of the Aspire dialogue to establish the forum cited above, to input the reviewal of protocol. This matter is not new. The 36th Plenary Assembly session adopted a resolution that as a sector, we need to have a strategic role in the revised protocol on gender and development. Lastly, Mr. President, I understand that SADC-PF is working towards becoming a regional parliament. Hence, we are operating like one. The Standing Committee on the Gender Equality, Women's Advancement and Youth Development challenges the House to conduct its business like a real parliament, e.g., all resolutions adopted by Parliament are expected to be implemented. Hence, we are appealing to the Executive Committee that the 36th Plenary Assembly Session resolution, which adopted the Standing Committee's resolutions, that each chairperson be a substantive member of the Executive Committee with full voting rights, be implemented with immediate effect. That is one way of implementing SADC-PF's resolution of gender mainstreaming, which happens to be a SADC policy embedded in the SADC Gender and Development Declaration, signed by heads of states and governments in 2008. Mr. President, I want to thank you very much, and I support my president, my chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Now the motion is open for general debate, but before we do that, before I take takers, let me guide the committee as follows. They have made a specific recommendation in their report as regards amendment of Article 12 of the Constitution. Let me bring your attention to Standing Order Rule number 11 of the Rules and Procedures, subitem 7. That rule is saying the Executive Committee shall, 7, submit to the Plenary Assembly for approval any amendments to the Constitution in line with Article 29 and Rules of Procedure pursuant to Rule 51. So what that means is that your recommendation is proper, but it has to be properly channeled. Let it come to this plenary through the Executive Committee report. Let them look at it and then submit to the plenary with its specific recommendations. But your report will be debated upon as presented, apart from that specific proposal of the constitutional amendment, which has to be properly channeled.